We've got National NRA spokesperson Dana Lash joining us from Dallas today. Dana, good morning to you.
Steve, good morning to you.
Okay, so you don't need guns. Just learn karate or use your words.
Yeah, karate or words. I'm certainly not going to take any kind of firearm lecture from people who clearly don't either own them or have never even fired them, and don't even understand the concept of self-defense either. This idea that you're going to have a 6-round limit, and then they compared them to cats, Steve, because you know people all over the United States every single day successfully defend their lives using cats.
Well, one of the things that he brought up, and I've heard a number of people on the political left for the most part talk about, is the number of guns. I've heard them say, I can't believe the guy had 30 guns or 40 guns, whatever the number is. You know, something I would ask them is, what is the correct number of guns any American can have? Because I haven't heard anybody say an American should only have blank number of guns, or 1 gun, or no guns. I've heard a lot of people say no guns.
Right. Well, yeah, and I'm curious to see how they propose that to work, because you would need firearms to go door to door to houses all over the United States, millions of Americans, and confiscate said firearms. And to that point, Steve, there are millions of Americans all throughout the country that own multiple firearms, and some of them, yes, even own 40 firearms. And you know what? They've been owning these 40 firearms for decades, and millions of law-abiding Americans who have not done anything. Firearm owners, concealed carriers, they're the most law-abiding group. And that's the thing. Evil lives among us, and I've said this before. It's real. You have to deal with evil, and I certainly want to be prepared to deal with evil or a monster with the ability to defend myself, as opposed to not having that ability to defend myself. And people like Michael, who do their show over at SNL in a building where they have armed security, they have the luxury of being able to tell everyone else to disarm because it's class warfare. These individuals can afford private security. They work in a building that's with armed guards, and you know that they wouldn't go for one single day without those armed guards. Why don't you give up the firearms that your private security is holding? You're not being more virtuous just because you're paying someone else to carry it. You're outsourcing it because you lack the courage of your own convictions.
Did you see Dianne Feinstein was on one of the Sunday chat shows yesterday, and she was asked, are there any laws that would have prevented what happened in Las Vegas? And she said no. Yeah.
She said no because, and I can't even believe my words or my mouth is making these words, she was right on that. There's nothing that could have been done, unfortunately, to prevent this tragedy. You know, and I know that this investigation is ongoing, and I don't want to get ahead of the law enforcement that's involved in this right now. But usually with individuals like these, there are some sort of red flags, and I'm just curious as to what sort of vibe, what sort of red flags that this individual was putting out. I mean, I look at James Hodgkinson. Immediately after that tragedy, nobody really knew his MO, and it took a while for that information to come out that he was targeting on political ideology. But then people started talking about the red flags that were popping up about this guy, and sooner or later the truth will out.
Right, exactly. Although people who knew this guy can't figure out what those red flags were. I want one. We're going to play one more soundbite for you, Dana. Here is Steve Schmidt, who was for a while John McCain when he was running for president, chief strategist. Here he is on HBO on Friday night.
The founding fathers, though, they could no more conceive of an AK-47 or an AR-15 firing on full automatic than they could have conceived of a spaceship. It is harder to buy cough medicine than it is to buy an AK-47 or 50 of them.
Is that true? It's harder to buy cough medicine than it is to buy an AK-47 or 50 of them?
No, and by his logic, you would have to buy cough medicine that's actually really old. I mean, pre-1986 is how old that cough syrup would have to be, and then you have to get law enforcement approval and spend thousands of dollars. That's completely inaccurate. And he's just not speaking from any position of experience, so I'm not quite sure why he's chiming in on the law here. But no, you have to go through many steps, in fact, to be able to do that. And for his point, Steve, really quickly on the historicalness of full auto. In fact, our founding fathers were aware of it. We had the puckle gun, the knock gun, the Belton gun. The Continental Congress was getting ready to purchase a fully automatic firearm, but they were prohibited in doing so only because of cost, not because of desire. So if people actually picked up a book and understood the history about firearms, maybe they wouldn't make such silly arguments on live television. That's awful.
I hadn't heard those stories before. All right, Dana Lash from the NRA, thank you very much for joining us from Dallas.
Thank you so much.
You bet. All right, meanwhile, it's not just Saturday Night Live pushing liberal talking points.
If Trump is upset, Rex Tillerson called him a moron. Wait till he...
Welcome back. One final point before we go tonight. Since Monday night, 6,755,610 people have watched Jimmy Kimmel's tearful plea for gun control, and that's just on YouTube. I'm one of those viewers. I've watched his monologue twice, actually. It's 9 minutes long, and it is chock full of inaccuracies. Let's break it down.
This to be a comedy show. I hate talking about stuff like this. I just want to, laugh about things every night. But it seems to be becoming increasingly difficult lately. It feels like someone has opened a window into hell. And what I'm talking about tonight isn't about gun control. It's about common sense.
And there it is, the most used and abused, recycled, nonsensical talking point the Democrats pull out of their back pocket every time they talk about gun control. It's common sense, they say. Well, let me ask you this. What is common sense about restricting the rights of law-abiding gun owners as punishment for the heinous murder of lawbreakers? What makes you think bad guys would stop getting their hands on guns just because the guns are illegal? Did that work when we illegalized drugs? It's fundamentally flawed logic, and it should be elementary. Banning guns wouldn't stop criminals because criminals already don't care about breaking the law. But Kimmel goes on.
Common sense says no good will ever come from allowing a person to have weapons that can take down 527 Americans at a concert.
86 people killed in Nice, France by a terrorist with a truck. 3,000 people killed in New York City by terrorists with airplanes and bombs. 23 people killed and 250 others wounded in Manchester, England by a terrorist with a bomb at the Ariana Grande concert. Should we ban trucks, pressure cookers, jetliners? Well, of course not, because it's not the weapon that commits the crime. It's funny how none of the other lorries in Europe have gone on murderous rampages without a driver with a mission to kill. It's the criminal who commits the crime.
Common sense says you don't let those who suffer from mental illness buy guns.
Listen, there's absolutely no doubt that Stephen Paddock was a demented individual. Only an evil and sick mind could justify committing indiscriminate mass murder like he did. But Paddock had never been diagnosed with any mental illness that we are aware of currently. It's already against federal law to sell or give a firearm to any person, and I quote federal statute here, any person who has been adjudicated as a mental defective or has been committed to any mental institution. That's not to mention the myriad of state regulations limiting access to weapons to people with severe mental illnesses. But Kimmel doesn't care about facts, and he keeps going.
The NRA fought to make sure people on the no-fly list can buy guns. They aren't allowed to get on a plane. They're allowed to own a very dangerous gun. Who thinks that makes sense?
This does make sense because the no-fly list doesn't make sense. Did you know people are mistakenly put on the no-fly list all the time? Like innocent people? Did you know Senator Ted Kennedy was mistakenly put on the no-fly list? And there's no recourse for American citizens who are accidentally added to this list. It's not just terrorists and terror suspects. Now, it might not be a bad idea to prohibit people on the no-fly list from purchasing firearms, but not until the no-fly list itself is reformed. Just a little research and Jimmy Kimmel would have known that. But no, he'd rather stick to his false narrative.
An amendment, I guess, our forefathers wanted us to have AK-47s, is the argument, I assume. Orlando, Newtown, Aurora, San Bernardino, every one of these shootings, the murder used automatic or semi-automatic rifles, which are not weapons you use for self-defense.
First of all, Mr. Kimmel, let me get personal for a moment. Maybe you don't use semi-automatic weapons like an AR-15 for self-defense. You're surrounded by security at all times. But many women, especially petite women like me, find AR-15s easier to handle for self-defense or home defense than, say, a shotgun. What message are you sending to women when you push to ban AR-15s? You're telling us we don't know best how to defend ourselves and telling us we don't have a right to do so. Second of all, we don't know yet what kind of weapon Stephen Paddock used. The latest reports say he modified his semi-automatic weapons, but automatic weapons have been illegal in the U.S. for 31 years, since 1986. Please look up your facts before you spew more nonsense.
In February, he also signed a bill that made it easier for people with severe mental illness to buy guns legally.
Well, that was just false, and Jimmy Kimmel knows that. Democrats lied about the story earlier in the year, but here's the truth of it. Right before he left office, President Obama gave the Social Security Administration power to take away people's right to bear arms without going to court if the person receives disability from mental impairment that prevents the person from working. The key phrase here that Jimmy Kimmel ignores is taking away people's rights without going to court. What that means is Obama tried to deny citizens due process of law. President Trump restored due process. And then Democrats lied about it. The repeal of the rule still prohibits people who have been adjudicated in court as mentally ill or unstable from purchasing firearms. But that's just it. The Democrats who are using Jimmy Kimmel as their mouthpiece, they don't care about common sense. They don't. They don't care about facts. They don't care that research shows gun control doesn't stop murder. Just look at Chicago. All the Democrats want to do is blame the NRA, blame the weapon, blame Republicans, blame legal gun owners, and blame Donald Trump. And ultimately take away our Second Amendment rights. This is how they start doing that. Is that common sense? And that's my final point. You can reach me on Twitter at Liz_Wheeler. If you liked the show, please send me an email at oann.com/contact. In the meantime, catch us here tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern. And until then, have a good night.